what advice would you give to somebody who doesn't love themselves? And two, what would be the first step in learning to love yourself?
Those are really good questions. And I think a lot of people don't know how to love themselves. And I want to come to you in this podcast because two questions have been asked. And it's always our desire to see a really healthy you and to becoming the best you on the earth, but not just ending there, where our goal is not just for you to become, a healthy you. Our goal is really for you to fulfill the assignment that God orchestrated for you. And I think we're never going to get there if we don't get on the journey of being a healthy us, because everything flows from within. So the question is, what advice would I tell somebody that doesn't love themselves? And I think the first thing I would say is it's actually one of the greatest commandments. It's in Matthew chapter 22, right? When here Jesus was asked the question by a Pharisee, and he was really trying to trap Jesus, verses 36 to 39. And they asked him, what's the greatest commandment? And he responded, Jesus, that is, his teacher, responded so perfect. And he said, the greatest commandment is to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and then to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And he said, if you fulfill these two, you will have fulfilled the entire law. You won't break the law. You will never be a lawbreaker. And our world is filled with laws, right? And those laws are not meant to keep us from something, but they're meant to protect us from something. So every law is not a restriction. It's actually a protection. So when God comes to us and he tells us, Jesus comes to us and he tells us that this is the greatest commandment, he's actually protecting us from any other law that we could break. We could call it a law, we could call it, but it's really self-protection. It's really protecting ourselves from maybe getting hurt by others. Maybe it's protecting us also from ourselves, because sometimes we can be our worst enemy. So what advice would I tell somebody that doesn't love themselves? Number one, it's the greatest commandment for a particular reason. And unfortunately, it's very complex. I think that that's going to take a journey, and that's going to take a lifetime, that it's not overnight. So give yourself some space to grow in this, because it's not going to be something that you are going to arrive at immediately, or because you listen to a podcast, or, because you got on this journey. I think that it's a work in progress. I think that it's not overnight. It's something that is complex, because we humans are very complex. And there's a lot of things that have happened to us in our past, or maybe you're going through something that maybe is prohibiting you from understanding you and loving you. There's a lot of reasons as to why we don't love ourselves. And so what I would say to somebody who doesn't love themselves is get on the journey to loving yourself. And then I'll move on to say you've got to get to know yourself, because we can only heal. I can't talk about loving yourself if I don't talk about healing, because healing is going to get us into the journey of loving ourselves. Oftentimes we don't love ourselves because there was trauma. Trauma is something that happened to us. It's something that we were exposed to, whether it was as a child or something recent, or in the years past, you had loss. You had something that happened to you that was traumatic. It could be a big thing or a little trauma. Regardless, is a trauma to you. I cannot say, oh, no, just bypass that. That's no big deal. It's just a dog. You can get another one. Or it's just a cat. You get another one. It's just a bird. Get another one. No, it was trauma to you. And that affected you. It brought stress to you. PTSD is that. It's post-traumatic, right? It's something that it was traumatic to you. It's trauma post, right? Something that happened to you, and your body feels the stress of it. And trauma shows up in us. It shows up in many areas. And last podcast, we talked about how trauma shows up in our perfectionism. It shows up in our low self-esteem. Trauma showing up in a lot of areas. And we don't think of it as trauma. We think of it as, oh, it's just something that I'm battling. I got to get over it. And that's not a journey to loving yourself. You have to know to love yourself, to get on that journey. It's going to require some healing. And the second question is, so really identifying it, why am I not loving myself? What's going on? Is there still trauma involved? Because keep in mind that trauma affects 3 relationships: your relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and your relationship with God. We might have distorted views of the 3. Could trauma be the reason why you have a distorted view of you when you look in the mirror and you don't like yourself, or you're really hard on yourself? Many of us are hard on ourselves. On a personal level, that's how I was. I was very, very hard on myself. I had a hard time with failure. I had a hard time with defeat. And many of us that grew up in church, I grew up in church starting like at the age of 16 years old, which is very young. And I grew up thinking that you couldn't love yourself that way. It was selfish. And we think that it's selfish to think of ourselves, but in reality, it's one of the greatest commandments. So I have to understand how to love myself. So get on the journey of healing, because trauma probably has affected your relationship with yourself. And the second question was, how do I start loving myself? Well, you've got to get out of shaming yourself, because you're never going to heal in the context of shame. You're never going to heal in the context of being hard on yourself. You are never going to heal in the context of bullying yourself. We belittle ourselves. How many negative thoughts do you have of yourself throughout the day? Well, you're never going to get on the journey of healing. So you've got to examine that. So to answer the question, I'm going to give you an acronym called MEPS. To start loving yourself, the foundation to loving yourself, right? And getting on this journey is going to require MEPS. So the beginning of self-love, you can start with a checklist, how you're doing. Check in with yourself. This is the journey. I'm giving you the first step on how to loving yourself. Number 1, MEPS, mentally, M-E, emotionally, P, physically, and S, spiritually. So ask yourself the questions every day. Do a checklist. Every once in a while, stop, pause what you're doing, and ask, how am I doing mentally? Do you ever wake up and really ask yourself, maybe while you're driving, how am I doing today mentally? What are my thoughts? Do I feel overwhelmed? Am I worried? Am I stressed out? What are my thoughts like? And that you can give yourself a checklist. And I gave 12 thinking traps that we all fall into. And that you can revert back to even my YouTube video. And there I talk about the 12 thinking traps that we fall into. So the beginning of self-love is doing a checklist. 1, how am I mentally? And don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to cover it. Don't try to, just bypass it. But really ask yourself that honest question. How am I mentally? Am I a mess? And why? And you also, please understand, you can only heal in the context of compassion and curiosity. So I can't heal unless I start to get curious about myself. If I try to ignore myself or deceive myself into thinking that I'm okay and I'm really not okay, that is not the journey to self-love. That is not the journey to loving yourself and to heal. E, emotionally, ask yourself the question, how am I doing? What am I feeling? Do I feel resentful? Am I bitter? Am I angry? Am I resentful? Am I frustrated today? How are you feeling? Check in. And then ask yourself why. P, physically, how are you doing physically? Are you overeating? Are you overindulging? Are you failing to maybe confront yourself physically? Why? Does that have to do with self-love? Self-hatred is probably there. So you overindulge and you overeat. And then we try to excuse ourselves. Don't excuse yourself. Ask yourself the question, why do I not take care of myself physically? Do I feel tired? Am I in pain? And could that be because you have maybe some self-hatred there and you don't love yourself enough to take care of yourself, to go for a walk, to get your body moving, to start exercising, to eat healthy and keeping your body nourished? And S, spiritually. How are you spiritually? We all have a spirit. I can't deny the spirit. Is your spirit disconnected from God? Is your spirit disconnected? Is it a distance? That is the beginning of self-love. And if you can get honest with yourself, right, then you can start to love yourself. That healing begins. Why am I like this? What am I thinking? What is this feeling that I have? And why do I have it? And where did it come from? And start to get very curious about yourself. That's the beginning of self-love. I think that this is a pause moment for a lot of people, for all of us. And I think it's a self-reflection, because I think for a long time, we have been taught to just bypass. We care for everybody else and we don't care for ourselves. So that is the journey of self-love. Start by doing a check and inventory of yourself. And I hope that this podcast is being a blessing to you guys. I want to see you whole. I want to see you healthy. A healthy you is healthy. You means healthy relationships. Healthy you means a better you, a joyful you. And then you can get on this journey of really enjoying yourself. So get on the journey, and we will see you guys next time.